Hey there! In this alternative video scenario, I want to show you what would happen if Portugal had saved most of their colonial empire. We'll explore what consequences that would have for the Cold War, as well as the regions around the Portuguese Empire. The downfall of the Portuguese Empire began in 1947, when India gained their independence. Portugal still had holdings in India. They were called Estado de India, or in English, State of India. These were the territories of Goa, which is this big state right here, and the Manindui, which are very small and cannot be seen on the map, but they are located right here. I mentioned that the downfall of the Portuguese Empire began here, since just 2 months after India gained their independence, France transferred their Indian holdings to the new state. This put a lot of pressure for Portugal to do the same. This was resisted by António Salazar, the somewhat dictator of Portugal at the time. He said that all these territories were an integral part of Portugal. The Portuguese constitution was amended to change the status of the colonies to overseas provinces. Portugal no longer called itself an empire, rather it was rephrased to pluricontinental nation with overseas provinces. In the year of 1954, a local uprising overthrew the Portuguese authority in the enclave of Dadra and the surrounding city of Nagar Haveli, which is about 10 miles from Daman. The remaining Portuguese holdings in India were in danger. India enjoyed support from all domestic parties as well as from the Soviet Union and its allies. In 1961, there was an uprising in Angola. Seeing that the Portuguese are busy elsewhere, the Indians push and capture all Portuguese territories on the Indian subcontinent. The next year, all were formally annexed into India. Portugal refused to recognize the annexation. They said that the territories were actually occupied. Remember like 2 seconds ago when I said that there was an uprising in Angola? The uprising was caused by poor working conditions on Angolan cotton plantation. The protesters burned their employees' stock and attacked Portuguese traders. This began the downfall of the Portuguese holdings in Africa. There were 2 different views on the matter. First was of the army. They believed that it would be impossible to win against guerrilla tactics and the Portuguese should negotiate with the independence movements. The second opinion was of the somewhat dictator António Salazar. He was determined to keep the Portuguese Empire intact and sent 50,000 troops to Angola. The Angolans attacked the Portuguese settlers, killing about 1,000 initially. The world was sympathetic for the Portuguese because of the killings. By the end of 1961, the Portuguese military was very effective and had pushed all the insurgencies out of Angola and into the jungles of Congo. This happened because in Angola there were 2 main factions fighting for independence, one backed by the USSR and one by the USA. This made coordination between the 2 increasingly difficult. Portugal also received support from South Africa. From now on, only a little fighting happened in Angola, just the occasional ambushes. I want to mention here that the father of Cristiano Ronaldo fought in this war against Angola. Imagine if he was killed in action and Cristiano Ronaldo hadn't been born. Love him or hate him, football would be very different, I think. Also, while the fighting was going on, in the city of Uida, located in Benin, the tiny Portuguese front of São João Baptista de Ajuda was annexed by Benin, who had just gained their independence from France. To make matters even worse, in 1963, Portuguese Guinea rebelled too and was probably the most difficult out of the colonial uprisings. It was often called Portugal's Vietnam. The reasons for Portuguese Guinea being so successful is that because of the uprising was led by a single well-trained militia. The insurgency also enjoyed support from neighboring countries like Senegal and Guinea. They were so successful that the Portuguese even tried to coup neighboring Guinea so they can prevent the rebels from hiding, regrouping and resting there. For most of the war, the Portuguese only controlled a small territory around the capital of Bissau. The Portuguese got into a stalemate, meaning that they couldn't make any progress on the battlefield, but were spending a lot of money on the war with no results to show for it. It's possible that Portugal knew that they weren't going to win, but kept fighting because if they let Portuguese Guinea succeed from the Portuguese Empire, a domino effect would start and another Portuguese colonist might want to leave the empire. The next year in 1964, Mozambique rebels tried to form a government independent from that of the Portuguese Empire. Mozambique rebels were mostly supported by the USSR and controlled a large chunk of land in the north. There was yet another safe haven for rebel fighters in neighboring Tanzania. In the early 70s, Portugal secured the help of Rhodesia, today known as Zimbabwe. Where Portugal failed, however, is to gain the support of the people in the colonies. In 1972, a Portuguese company of soldiers killed an entire village of 300 people, which damaged the local and the international reputation of the Portuguese. One of the major attempts to secure domestic support with the colony of Mozambique was to construct a massive dam, employing half of the Portuguese soldiers stationed there. This however backfired, since it caused a drought and made the native people resent the Portuguese even more. Despite this setback, in 1973, Portugal controlled most of the Mozambique territory. Let me summarize all these wars for you, starting off with the Portuguese India in 1961, they lost the state of Goa. Next is the War of Independence of Angola in 1961, where the Portuguese overpowered the rebels, pushing them off the country. Portuguese Guinea had its War of Independence in 1963, where they were very effective and the war ended in a stalemate. Finally, there is Mozambique, where fighting started in 1964 and just 8 years later, Portugal controlled most of the country. So, victory goes to the Portuguese again. On the 25th of April 1974, there was a coup in Portugal. The peaceful revolution in Portugal was called the Carnation Revolution. It was called as such because Portuguese soldiers put carnations into the weapons and the coup ended without any casualties. Portugal celebrates Freedom Day on 25th of April every year. The next year in 1975, Portugal withdrew all their soldiers from their African holdings. Also, Portugal abandoned its colony of Timor, and Timor was invaded by neighboring Indonesia. After the Portuguese had left Angola and Mozambique, fighting resumed over there, but this time it was in the form of a civil war, which took the lives of over 1 million people. In the case of Angola, their civil war lasted for over 27 years, and Mozambique's civil war lasted for 15 years. Finally, in 1999, Macau was transferred to China. This was the last overseas Portuguese colony, and it marked the end of the Portuguese Empire. By the way guys, if you liked the video, I would strongly appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe. It's gonna help me out a lot and I'll be able to go full time on this project and upload more than once each week. Now, back to the video. So, almost all ex-Portuguese colonies in the post-war world were worse off than what they had hoped to achieve. What would happen if things went differently? It is entirely possible that if Portugal had won decisively one of their wars against the rebels, no other rebel groups would form. Also, if Portugal secured the support of the colony's public and improved their economic situation, they might want to stay as part of Portugal and just have regional autonomy. The Manandui couldn't be saved, but the territory of Goa gets fortified with 23,000 soldiers at any given time. Most of them were native people, about 80% of the army. Their role was to protect the colony from India. Before India had invaded, the soldiers were building up the colony and improving the standard of living. Life was so much better in Portuguese India, people from India emigrated to the state to find work and seek better standard of living. In just 13 years, the colony's population quadrupled, going from about 600,000 to 2.5 million. India still invaded, but they were unsuccessful due to poor terrain and how built up the defenses were at the time. In just 2 years of fighting, India gives up, but doesn't give back the cities of the Manandui. Instead, they have to pay close to 5% of their national GDP as compensation for the war. In Africa, the Portuguese colonies weren't the first to get their independence. Pretty much all French colonies in Africa gained their independence in the 1960s. About a year before Portugal had their own issues with Africa, Portuguese colonies officially gained independence in 1975. In these 15 years, it is possible that the Portuguese colonies see how mismanaged the newly independent nations in Africa are, and how the natives had swapped one evil for another. Portugal would also sponsor for student exchange programs, giving the opportunity to educate the colonies back in Portugal. The illiteracy rate in the colony of Angola dropped from over 80% to 34% in just 15 years. Fighting would still start in Angola as usual, however, Portugal would begin their campaign to improve the lives of the natives, so they support the Portuguese. They push the rebels out of the country and Angola is saved. There is just the occasional incursion from the rebels, but other than that, life was very peaceful. In Portuguese Guinea, fighting is not as difficult as it was in our timeline. Portugal received support from the West as the rebels were sponsored by the USSR. Portugal manages to successfully coup neighboring Guinea. The natives supported Portugal more than the rebels, so no native people were joining and strengthening the rebels. After 5 years of fighting, there was nothing left of the rebels. In the province of Mozambique, fighting doesn't erupt, as the people saw that fighting in Angola only resulted in destruction and the alternative government isn't better than the current one. With that, Portugal had saved its overseas territories. Later, all were given regional autonomy. Portugal becomes a federation called United Provinces of Portugal. They also changed their flag to something like this. Let me explain what we are looking at. This is the coat of arms of Mozambique. This is of Angola, and this of Portuguese India. Finally, this is of Portuguese Guinea. In the middle you see the Portuguese coat of arms with the words Patria esta é a ditosa minha amada, which translates to homeland, this is the happy one my beloved. In the end, Portugal had good relations with the West, South Africa and Rhodesia. About the latter two, they create an economic alliance with a common currency to benefit the region. Botswana also joins them, this is how the economic alliance is looking on the map. Feeling left out, Lesotho and Swaziland join too. To finish off the video with a bang, in late 1975, when Francisco Franco of Spain had died, Portugal invades the Spanish to take control over their disputed territory, the town of Olivença. This border dispute is over 175 years old, since it happened in 1801. The government of Spain doesn't fight back, as there is a lot of infighting in Spain as to who will succeed Franco. For now, they just let the Portuguese have the town of Olivença. This is where I'm gonna end the video. Let me know if you want to see a part 2 on this alternative scenario, where I explore economics and further expansion of the Portuguese faction. Will they unite all of Africa? Let me know in the comments if you want to see that video. Also, watch these two videos if you want to consume more of my content. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.